Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving into G9, General English 9, Unit 07, Lesson 04. Determine a main idea or theme and synthesize ideas from multiple sources. Think of this explainer as, well, your personal training session for building a true literary detective's toolkit. You know, when you open a really complex book or a challenging poem, it's so easy to just kind of skim the surface, right? But today, we're going to learn how to analyze text like an absolute pro, uncovering those deep, hidden meanings that authors and poets deliberately tuck away inside their words.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First up, lesson objectives. Then, determining the theme, followed by synthesizing multiple sources. After that, we'll look at analyzing the speaker, clear up some common theme misconceptions, and finally, wrap things up with a quick knowledge check.
Lesson objectives: building your toolkit. Let's set our ultimate goal for today.
To build that toolkit, we've got to start with the absolute foundation, the theme. So what is a theme exactly? It's a central message or a universal idea that's explored in a work of literature. But here's the really important part. It has to be represented as a complete thought. It's not just a passing topic. It is the specific commentary the author is making about that topic. So instead of just saying, oh, this story is about love, a true theme is a complete statement. Something like, love conquers all. Or maybe, war brings out the best and worst in humanity. It's a universal message that totally transcends time and culture.
Now, how do we actually find this theme in the wild? Because let's be real, authors rarely just hand it to you on page 1. You really have to hunt for it. Well, one of the best ways to identify a theme is to pay super close attention to the characters. Watch their actions. Look at the specific decisions they make. And honestly, even more importantly, look at their conflicts. Are they dealing with internal conflicts? Really wrestling with their own minds? Or is it external? Are they fighting against society, or nature, or maybe another character? By analyzing exactly how these conflicts are managed and eventually resolved, you'll get massive clues about what the author's underlying message actually is.
Section 2. Synthesizing ideas. Building the bridge.
You can think of synthesis as the analytical bridge. It connects all those tiny, specific reading details into one big-picture thematic conclusion. Synthesizing ideas basically means drawing conclusions and making generalizations by integrating information. You're taking all the separate puzzle pieces, right? The character actions, the setting, the conflicts, and you're snapping them together on this bridge. By doing this, you're able to accurately identify the tone, the purpose, the mood, or the theme of a passage. It's literally higher-level thinking at its finest.
So the crucial point is how you actually do this while you're reading. First, you've got to consider all the forms of information provided. Take it all in. Then, interpret those contextual clues and textual details. Once you've gathered all of that up, you integrate those clues to form a generalized conclusion. And here is a huge tip. When you're weighing different possible interpretations of a text, you always want to select the interpretation that takes the most information into account. If your idea of the theme only works for one single paragraph but completely contradicts the rest of the book, you haven't synthesized properly. You need the conclusion that best fits the entire puzzle.
All right, moving on to analyzing the speaker, the voice behind the mask.
When we're talking about literature, and especially poetry, the speaker is the voice that delivers the poem. But here is the secret you absolutely have to remember. The speaker is a constructed persona. It's a mask. The speaker might actually resemble the real-life author, but they also might not. Through the words they choose, the details they decide to focus on, and their overall perspective, the speaker is constantly revealing their own unique character, their own bias, and their own tone.
To make this perfectly clear, let's look at a quick comparison. The speaker in a poem is exactly parallel to the narrator in prose fiction, like in a short story or novel. Both are constructed voices, totally invented by the author. Honestly, if you know how to spot an unreliable narrator in a fiction story, you already have the exact same skills you need to spot a biased speaker in a poem. They're characters in their own right, and they offer their own unique and sometimes very flawed perspectives.
Let's move to our next point and see how this builds into a practical strategy. When you're analyzing a speaker, just follow a really clear two-step process. Step 1, establish the dramatic situation. Figure out who is speaking, who they're talking to, and under what circumstances. Then step 2, examine their word choice, the imagery they use, and their specific selection of details. Since they are a character, the exact words they choose act like a window, revealing their internal biases and their mental state.
And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Imagine you're reading a poem, and the speaker describes a bunch of ordinary tulips as dangerous African animals. Well, what does that tell us? I mean, it tells us absolutely nothing factual about flowers, right? But it tells us everything about the speaker's mental state. That bizarre, highly fearful description is a massive clue. It requires you to synthesize that information and realize, okay, this speaker is extremely anxious, maybe a bit unhinged, or feeling deeply threatened by something completely ordinary. Everything in the poem acts as evidence about the speaker.
Because the speaker is a constructed character, we actually have a golden rule for analysis. Always write the speaker rather than the poet's name when you're analyzing the voice in a poem. Unless you have totally undeniable evidence that the poet is writing a strict autobiographical piece, you must separate the author's real identity from the fictional character they invented to deliver the poem. Doing this is a real hallmark of mature literary analysis.
Now for Section 4, Common Theme Misconceptions. The biggest trap out there is confusing the plot with the theme. Listen, the plot is just the literal sequence of events. So, for example, a plot might be, a young girl overcomes her fear of water to save a drowning child. That is simply what happened. But the theme? The underlying message the author is trying to convey through those events, that might be about the true nature of courage, the necessity of self-sacrifice, or the ultimate triumph of overcoming personal fears. Basically, think of it like this. The plot is the vehicle, but the theme is the destination.
Another major trap is simplifying a theme down to a single word. If you just say the theme is love or freedom, that's entirely too simple. It completely lacks nuance. A mature thematic analysis requires a complete thought. So a much more accurate theme would be something like, love can conquer great obstacles. See the difference? It tells us exactly what the author is actually saying about the topic of love. Let's clear up just a couple more misconceptions while we're at it. First, a lot of people think there's only one correct theme for any given text. That is totally false. Most great works of literature explore multiple themes, and different readers can synthesize different details to arrive at totally different yet perfectly valid interpretations. Second, students sometimes think a theme is just the author's strict personal opinion. Also false. A theme is an exploration or a commentary on the human experience. Merely exploring an idea deeply in a book doesn't mean the author is strictly endorsing it in real life.
Section 5, Quick Knowledge Check. Now, what's really interesting about this next bit is that it's going to test those very analytical tools we've been building today. Let's see how you do. Okay, here is your challenge. True or false? The theme of a text is simply what the story is about, usually summed up in a single word, and there is only one correct theme per text. Take a second, think about what we just discussed regarding complete thoughts, plot versus theme, and multiple interpretations. Do you have your answer?
And the answer is absolutely false. If you've been using your brand new toolkit, you already know that a theme is a complete underlying message. It is definitely not a single word topic. And furthermore, complex texts almost always have multiple themes woven into them. Your ability to find them relies entirely on your perspective as a reader and how skillfully you synthesize all those contextual clues and details.
To really cement everything we've covered, let's do a super concise recap of our 3 required concepts. First, you now know how to determine a theme. You know how to dig way past the plot to uncover a complete, universal message, usually by examining character conflicts and their resolutions. Second, synthesize ideas. You know how to integrate specific textual details, combining clues from across the whole text to draw larger, well-supported conclusions. And third, analyze the speaker. You know to treat the poetic voice as a constructed persona with its own biases and mental states, always remembering that the speaker is totally distinct from the real-life author.
So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. The next time you sit down and open up a challenging book or read a difficult poem, what kind of reader are you going to be? Are you going to just mindlessly skim the surface of the plot? Or will you actively use your new literary detectives toolkit to synthesize the clues, unmask the true biases of the speaker, and finally discover that rich underlying theme waiting just beneath the words? The choice, and ultimately the true meaning, is completely up to you. Thanks for joining this explainer, and happy reading.